For the next 2 hours, you won't chase sleep. You'll be carried to it. Label the door, not the fear.
A name is a handle. Tonight, we learn to carry gently.
Things we return to themselves, without shame.
Not spectacle. Competence.
As it was, no brighter, no darker. Mercy, trimmed like a wick.
A city reassured by likeness. A corridor rehearsed by care.
Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced. Kindly, we return memory.
For the next 2 hours, you have a story and the sleep that follows. Comment remember, tap like, share with a friend who loves quiet mysteries.
If this kind of quiet, investigative storytelling helps you rest, take a breath and stay with me. Dim the lights, let the questions be soft, and we'll begin. I used to wear the collar. I used to carry a ring of keys that chimed like a thin bell when I walked too quickly through stone corridors, the way a nervous man rattles change in his pocket. The ring wasn't the one people photographed on postcards, not the brass-stamped symbol tourists imagine when they whisper about apostolic authority. Mine was a smaller ring, iron with a dusting of salt like the breath of a sea you can't see. Each key, notched with a code of dots and cuts, I was forbidden to discuss. I was, among other dull duties, a labeler, the man who writes small names on small tin plates and ties them to threads that disappear into shelves, boxes, reliquaries, and, sometimes, hinges that should not be there at all. It sounds harmless. Harmless is an art when danger is an ocean and you must present it as a cup of water. If you're listening to fall asleep, let me walk while you rest. I know the route by smell more than by sight. Cold iron, beeswax, the singed sweetness of snuffed wicks, limestone sweating in old age, and that other note people pretend not to recognize, the one like dried blood pressed thin into parchment. We called it ink when anyone asked. We lied with the politeness of librarians. I took vows. I kept them until I didn't. There is a kindness in breaking a vow before it breaks you. That is not church teaching. That is the small mercy of experience. My superior said once that every job can be reduced to housekeeping, even the unseen ones, especially those. We keep the house, he told me, not to hide the mess, but to keep the mess from learning our names. Then he handed me a pencil and a knife to sharpen it, and he showed me where the pencils were kept, and he showed me where the knives were kept, and he showed me how to move through the basilica after the last echo has folded itself to sleep. Down there, people like to say, down there, when they mean the floors beneath the nave, the attics that are basements of older churches, the crypts and subcrypts and galleries of brick and tufa. The air changes its mind about being air. It grows heavier without becoming thick, like a thought you can't quite finish. Stairs turn and turn again. The banister is a cord of stone worn slick by hands that never signed the visitor's book. I learned to keep my fingers to myself. Touch travels, and some touches collect interest. We were taught to hum when the rooms grew too silent. Not a hymn, not a tune, only a tone, like a thread that keeps you attached to your own body. The old masters called it a closure note. Humming does not ward anything off. It reminds you that your mouth is still yours. The first time I was brought to the cataloging corridor, I thought they had shown me a trick. 10 doors, each the same height, framed in the same pale stone, spaced with the kind of arithmetic that suggests someone believed numbers could be respectful. No two hinges matched. The metal spoke different dialects of age. Labels had been hammered into the jambs over centuries, layered like insect shells. Some were in Latin that would make a scholar wince, a monk's Latin, rushed and proud of being understood. Some were in shorthand, a private language of pragmatic men who didn't want to write a thing more than once. And 3 of the doors were not doors at all, if you insist on common definitions. They were outlines of doors and walls that were older than the passage itself, sketched in a substance that drinks light without becoming darker. We called those void doors. We called them that because names do work, and we needed work done. Not metaphor, my superior said gently when I asked. Not picture language. Not symbol. You will never open them. You will write their names when instructed. You will time the candles. You will note how many inches a wick shortens while you wait. That is all, he said, that is all. The way surgeons say, you may feel only a pinch. We were in the habit of words that under-promised and over-delivered. I kept notes in a tiny book, bound in soft skin. It fit in the hollow of my palm, so that if I pressed my hand to my chest, you'd think I was praying. The first entry is embarrassing in its eagerness. Today entrusted with section catenatus, chained volumes, upper racks, scent, old coin, sound, faint strumming like bees in a jar. I was not a poetic man before I went below. I am not a poetic man now. The prose of the underrooms forces itself upon you. A chain bites the fog around it, and you hear a metal taste you would otherwise call a smell. The senses bargain with one another. Sight tires of being right all the time. We worked by candle, and by a kind of gray lamp that did not flicker. The lamp made a halo without warmth, a ring of permission around our desks. The candles were for time. If that sentence bothers you, do not follow me farther. We measured our shifts by wax rather than by clocks. There were clocks, beautifully made, each with a handwritten note, reminding us that pendulums confess to gravity and do not consider other laws. The candle, obedient to heat and breath and whim, told truer stories. For tasks near the Intercalation Gate, no, not yet. I will earn that word later. We used only candles marked at the 1/4 inch. We had forms for how much wick one ought to spend on looking, and how much on writing down what the looking refused to say. On my 3rd night, which was not a night anyone on the surface would have counted as a night down there, a night is anything after the last bell, and before the first bird, I met Father L. He smelled of rosemary and copper, like a garden that had swallowed a coin. He had the kind of hands old scientists have in etchings. Long, lined, slightly stained with a permanence that has nothing to do with ink. He asked me if I knew why saints hold attributes in paintings. I told him the catechism answer, so we can tell who's who when faces and names repeat. He shook his head. Because memory, he said, needs a handle, and we have so few. Give it a sword, a wheel, a palm, a dog, and it will carry the rest across a river. I wrote that down. Later, I crossed it out. Later still, I wrote it again. The job of labeling is half accounting, half confession. The accounting is as you would expect. Numbers, shelf marks, dates that agree with other dates that agree with other dates. The confession is less forgiving. You are asked to admit what you have felt in the presence of what you have seen, and to do so without trembling the ink. There is a column for phenomena, which is a kind way of saying, Anything your supervisor will have to explain to someone who never comes below. Wax shortened more than flame can justify. Letter bled through paper that had been scraped to transparency. Map showed coast, unmapped by any pilot but consistent with star tables. We maintained decorum. We wrote in the passive voice. We kept our feelings in the margins, like misbehaving children made to sit on benches. On the seventh night, which is another way of saying the night I began to trust my feet in the dark, I was assigned to the lower racks of the chained books. The chains were not to prevent theft. Thieves do not come here, and if they did, their pockets would not help them. The chains, as far as men like me were told, stabilized the volumes against drift. Drift is a word we used when our superiors grew tired of correcting our terms. A book that drifts is not a book that moves across the shelf. It is a book that remembers other versions of itself, and left unaccompanied, might prefer to be one of those. Iron keeps certain moods in their lanes. The titles on the tin labels were holy in their own modest way. De calendario correcto in a hand that enjoyed its own clarity. Index sanctorum deletorum. An index of saints deleted, scratched in the hasty hand of someone embarrassed by the necessity. Epistolae monasticae de tempore vacuo, letters about empty time. Thesaurus miraculorum probatorum, a treasury of certified miracles. And next to it, of course, Thesaurus miraculorum redactorum, a treasury of miracles reduced, which is to say, returned to what they were before the rush of story gilded them. I opened none of them without a witness. These were not my rules. I had the sort of obedience that comes easily to younger sons and men who like tidy work. I will tell you how the void doors were explained to me, because the tone of the explanation is as important as its content. My superior used the voice of a man explaining how to unspool a fire hose. We do not open, he said. We do not test. We do not experiment. We observe. We name. We keep records. We route requests. If a request bears the seal, we log the hour and the length of wick burned in the corridor. We do not stand in a doorway. We do not stand between a doorway and a flame. We do not breathe in certain rooms if we can help it. We do not hum near the older hinges. We do not repeat a word 3 times. We do not say we are alone. He recited those lines as if they had once been rhymed, as if somewhere there had been a version for children. He placed a candle in my hand. He watched me strike the match. He nodded when my hands did not shake. Good, he said. Do not be brave. Bravery is wasteful. Be careful like a boring man who intends to die in his bed. I value boring men. There is an urge in me, a common urge, to make the fear in these rooms dramatic, to give it claws and teeth, to dress it in rags and a crown and have it pace a pit. That makes for fast listening but poor truth. The fear is administrative. It is full of forms and initials, of stamps pressed into wax that refuses to hold its shape, of dates that do not line up until someone with enough authority tells you they do and then orders lunch. An office manages the incomprehensible. That is both the joke and the terror. If you can index what should not exist, you can assign it a budget. And if it has a budget, it has a manager. And if it has a manager, it has schedules. And schedules mean people like me. Father L. did not treat me like a child. He did not treat me like a confidant either. He regarded me the way practitioners of old crafts regard apprentices in their first useful season, with the affection you reserve for a tool learning how not to break. He tested my hum against the lamp's shimmer. He showed me how to read a faded rubric by tilting the page until the letters stopped pretending to be absent. He taught me to ring the edge of a bowl with a wet finger so that its note would cancel the worst of the ringing in my own head. And once, when I asked whether the void doors led anywhere at all, he said, "You are thinking like a pilgrim. Think like a scribe. A scribe survives by never needing to know what is on the other side of a page." And then, as if he were afraid he had been unkind, he touched my shoulder and added, "But if you must make an image, consider a hallway that is made of looking rather than of stone. You do not walk it. It walks you, if invited. We do not invite." I slept poorly in those years. Sleep is a hallway too, and the doors in that hallway are both generous and nosy. I learned to give my dreams busy work. I set them to counting tiles, to checking shelves, to sharpening pencils that never grew dull. It helped. I woke with lists in my head instead of faces. The faces come later, when a man no longer earns his keep. You would like me to tell you about the first time the air changed in a way that made my bones ask for a coat. It was a simple task. We were to label a walled-up opening whose mortar had been salted and then polished until it refused to remember the brick it came from. A label had been there before. It had been removed. That was not routine. We had a tenderness for the work of our predecessors, even when they had been wrong, even when we had to write over them. It was a political decade, my superior said, as if decades were moods that passed like fevers. Now we will write the truth, but write it in a script that looks older than the lie. That way the truth will feel less like an insult. This is how you keep peace among men who distrust peace. The thread from which the tin label would hang was a human hair braided with linen. It had been someone's superstition and had become a rule. We did not inquire whose hair. We didn't ask such questions unless we wanted answers that made the day heavier. I wrote on the plate with a stylus cooled in water. The warmth of a hand can deform a letter in certain rooms. And I wrote Janua Memoriae. Observe. Do not approach. The letters sat there with the docility of good dogs. The corridor fogged, the way a mouth fogs a window when you speak too close. Father L. lifted his lamp and then lowered it. "Count," he said. "Count what?" "He have no that shower. Frun, bon, the note in your throat." Only then did I realize I had begun to hum. "Stop humming," he said softly. "If something answers, I want to hear which note it borrows." I closed my mouth. The echo of my own hum seeped away like tea into dry bread. We waited. You would expect a dramatist to give you a footstep, a whisper, a draft. We got a number. The candle dropped a line of wax it should not have dropped, not at that speed, not in that air. We measured the lip after it cooled. We logged the measure. We signed. We went to supper in a room that pretended to be a library. We did not speak of numbers over soup. There is a smile that belongs to men who believe they are doing a necessary harm. I learned to recognize it and to practice it, the way you practice a signature. It comes with the office. We were not erasing anything, we told ourselves. We were labeling. Labels do not change what they name. The naming is not the thing. This is technically true in the way a code is technically not a law, in the way a map is technically not a territory. We believed in technicalities the way sailors believe in knots. A week later, in an alcove cut with a precision that would flatter a jeweler, I was shown the Intercalation Gate for the first time. The name will serve, for now, though later I would learn other names in other tongues for other versions of the same discourtesy. The iron of it was not iron in the way a spoon is iron. It did not reflect, yet it accepted light. It did not absorb warmth, yet standing close to it felt like standing in wind that had learned to stay still. The hinge was decorated with marks that resembled teeth from an alphabet no one has the courage to invent. It was not open. Nothing was open. It is important to say that aloud. The door was closed the way a book is closed, the way a wound is closed, the way an eye is closed on purpose. "Do not whistle," my superior said before the thought had even formed behind my teeth. "You will want to. The mouth asks for sounds in rooms like this. Chew your tongue, bite it if you must. Mouths have been known to betray their owners." He smiled, the necessary harm smile, then revised it into a friendlier thing. "Count the candles, the thin ones." I counted 12. He wrote 13 without looking at them. I did not correct him. Correction is a way of stepping into someone's shadow. In those days, in the rooms where the walls remembered too much, I cultivated an affection for the small mistakes of the ordinary world. I loved a crooked frame, a misprinted label on a jar of jam, a church bulletin that announced the wrong psalm. They were proofs of freedom, the way a scuff on a floor proves the existence of shoes. In the underrooms, error felt curated, like a peasant playing a shepherd in a pageant for nobles. On the surface, mistakes had the right to be thoughtless. This is not theology. This is weather. If you are still awake, you might be wondering how a man learns to betray something that raised him. We were not taught treachery. We were taught balance. If the chain of a book was too taut, it would sing, and in singing, invite other notes that had no right to be in that air. If a candle guttered too suddenly, we did not blame wind or breath. We stepped back from the walls and held our tongues. If a label demanded to be written in a hand older than our own, we fetched the proper nib, and we wore a glove so our blood would not contribute stories. Nothing in that is treachery. Treachery, if that's the word, arrived when I learned to love what I labeled more than the rule that told me not to. Love is a poor employee. There is a smell that books make when you open a page that has waited too long. Not the earthy sweetness of lignin breaking down, not the ghostly vanilla most people think they love. A thin, startled scent like static before a storm, the air's hand hesitating above a cat. I followed that smell one night into a reading cell the size of a monk's patience. I had been sent for a single line, a cross-check to satisfy a request from a room with windows. The text was a calendar treatise that pretended not to be a confession. The copyist had written in the margin, "Time is a blessing until it is a policy." I copied the line, and then I put my pencil down and put my face in my hands and did nothing at all for the length of a wick. I have said little about prayer. People expect prayer in a story like this. They want Latin, preferably in a key that spoils sleep. There was prayer, but it was domestic, like the kind whispered over a child with a fever or a sink full of knives. We prayed for stubs to last, for lamps to hold their manners, for pages to agree about their own edges. We prayed for the men on the surface who funded our habits by believing in other kinds of miracles. We prayed for boredom. Boredom is as holy as bread when you have known a corridor that inhales. In time, the rooms began to treat me as furniture. That is the highest honor they grant. A chair is not an intruder. A chair is consulted by every body that rests. I made myself heavy with quiet. I kept my shoes soft. I trimmed my nails to the quick. I wore wool that did not crackle. I learned the weight of silence in grams and in miles. I wrote. I erased. I wrote again, slower, smaller, with a hand that understood it was being watched by the thing it described. If you had met me then, you would have said I was a careful man. You would have been right, and you would have missed the bruise blooming under the care. Care rubs, care burns. Care, in the absence of mercy, becomes a fever with excellent manners. The fever broke the night we relabeled a door whose previous name had been scratched out with such finality that the tin itself had thinned. The old letters had been driven deeper than the new. I held the plate to the lamp and read the ghost imprint, Porta ad nihilum, door to nothing. The new label asked me to write Ostum Archivi Securi Door of the Safe Archive. I wrote the lie in my neatest hand, and when I tied the hair thread and pressed the knot, the corridor answered with a quiet like teeth pressed together to keep from crying out. "Did you hear anything?" my superior asked with professional indifference. "No," I said in the tone of a floor. "You are waiting for an event with edges, a scene that declares itself a scene, a gasp, a fall, a light that flips. Narratives, like rivers, want stones to speak around. But, Chapter 1, if we dare to call my first season below a chapter, has fewer stones and more silt, it settles on you. It coats the lip of your cup. You learn to drink carefully. You learn that not every door is opened by a hand. Some are opened by a sentence spoken in a small, tidy room, while two men pretend they are not afraid of one another's throats. One night, late in the shift we called the last wick, I was sent with Father L to measure the breadth of a corridor. That was the actual wording, mensurare spiritum. The breath in question was the way the air thinned and thickened at steady intervals, as if the passage itself had acquired lungs. We used a ribbon and a set of bells tuned to the letters of the alphabet. When the ribbon stirred, a bell would ring, and we would write the letter, and the letters, when you looked at them for long enough, with enough hunger, would arrange themselves into a prayer or an insult or a recipe for a medicine no one makes anymore. We strung the ribbon, we set the bells, we waited. The bells told us nothing intelligible. The ribbon had a different idea. It reached for the void door like a man reaching for a lover he has promised not to name in public. The bells trembled with letters that don't belong to any tongue that writes from left to right. I took off my ring of keys because the smallest key had begun to buzz in a pitch that made my eyes water. Father L put his hand over mine, a weight as light as a blessing. "Enough," he said, and the bells forgot their manners and were quiet on command. We walked back slowly. He did not lecture me. He did not instruct. He asked me what I had smelled. I told him wax, stone, a thread of copper, and that thin, cruel scent that lives between ink and blood. He nodded as if we had completed a grammar exercise. "Good," he said. "Next time listen for the color of the dark." I would have laughed on the surface. Below, I nodded solemnly, as if he had asked me to set the table for an invisible guest. In the rooms where we kept maps, there was a drawer that refused the habit of staying a drawer. It played at being a map itself, a sheet pulled over a shape you could not name. I opened it with two hands, palms flat, the way a man opens a sleeping child's fist to remove a seed. Inside were coastlines that hugged stars rather than shores. The ink had been mixed with a powder that reminded me of crushed moth wing. A margin note in a nun's hand. Nuns wrote the most honest marginalia. No one expects them to dramatize. Read. If this is wrong, then the sky is wrong. Let the sky apologize. I traced a line with a wooden stylus. The line refused to be touched by something that had touched a living mouth. I used a bone tool instead, and it yielded the way a cat yields its weight to a lap. Entirely, and with the pretended indifference of trust. I am telling you this slowly on purpose. The beginning of any true confession is method, not scandal. Scandal will come. Scandal is a coward. It always waits for a crowd. Method stands there in the morning waiting to be criticized. We were methodical men in a place that encouraged superstition. We survived by choosing which little gods to humor. We did not whistle. We did not call a door by its nickname. We did not turn our backs on the Intercalation Gate, even when the candles were steady. We did not speak a saint's name near the index of the deleted. We did not announce an opinion within 3 yards of a chained book. And we did not, under any circumstances, remark aloud when a number changed between one reading and the next. Numbers are sensitive to attention. Attend to them too strongly, and they change to avoid embarrassment. There is one more thing I will tell you before you drift. I kept a second pencil. Not forbidden, nothing so theatrical, just mine. It was shorter than the others, sharpened with a knife that had belonged to a man who sharpened arrows during a famine. I liked the way it felt when it wrote my own initials in a place no eye would see. On the night I realized the candle had counted me rather than the other way round, I pressed that pencil so hard into the paper that the tin of the label beneath it took the impression. Later, holding that tin to the light, I read the ghost of my own name reversed. My letters small, obedient, almost shy whispering from metal. That was the moment I understood that nothing down there wants to be only itself. Not even me. Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced. And I, hired to be quiet, had learned the volume of quiet well enough to know when it was being turned up. If your eyes are heavy, let them close. I will keep walking. The corridor is long and well behaved. My keys will not chime. The candles will not complain. I will count the inches of wick and write the number in the smallest hand I can, and somewhere an iron hinge will listen, and somewhere a drawer will remember how to be only a drawer, and somewhere I will commit the smallest treason a careful man can commit. I will tell you what I saw, how I smelled it, and how the night breathed back. I learned quickly that stairs have tempers. On the surface, a stair is a device. Rise, run, a railing held for courtesy. Beneath the basilica, a stairwell remembers how it was carried into being, and it resents the weight of men who do not know its name. The first landing was colder than the second, warmer than the third, and at the fourth the air became ordinary again, as if the stone, tired of moods, decided to impersonate stone. Father L. called this settling pressure. A book might call it mensura temporis, the measure of time. The chalk mark carved beneath a seraph's wing said only MT, as if initials could persuade a century to sit quietly on a shelf. Do not decide what the rooms are, Father L. told me, until the rooms decide you. It sounded like mysticism, and perhaps it was, but below ground even pragmatists grow polite. We stopped where the lamps ended and the candles began. A bronze bracket held a bundle of tapers bound with red thread. I untied them, counted 12, and laid 9 back in the bracket for the next pair of hands. 9 is a poor number here, he said. It tastes unfinished. I returned 1 more. 10 felt superstitious. 11 felt like a joke told soberly. We carried 10. At the bottom of the next flight, a grill suggested a confession booth that had learned to lie on its side. Behind it, Vault Catenatus, the chained vault. The chains lay slack over the spines, like sleeping snakes. Their rings met at iron flowers hammered cold by men who whistled while working a habit the underrooms had not yet punished. Each book had its label. A tin tongue hung from hair-thin thread. The tin was honest. The thread was not. Hair and linen, I said, unable not to ask. Whose? Once it mattered, he said. Long enough ago that the men who cared have been dissolved into stories. The rule remains. Rules are calendars written for rooms, not for men. He handed me the stylus. Copy the labels onto the ledger. Your script must not look like your script. These volumes have known worse for less. I wrote, as if I were impersonating an ancestor. The ledger's columns made order look friendly. Shelf, C. 3. Title, De Calendario Correcto. Binding, gray vellum. Chain, double. Phenomena. None observed. That was a lie, not a mischievous lie, the wise lie of omission. I had felt a small persuasion in my wrist, a tug to date the entry with a year I did not recognize. I dated it properly and, beneath the line, wrote the strange year in a hand only I would be able to read. We called this harmless precaution redundancy. Redundancy is the habit of men who know the floor will shift and prefer to fall elegantly. Further in, the temperature discovered its appetite. Warmth pooled in a cul-de-sac where the chained books gave way to arcae silentis silent chests. Their lids bore carved alphabets that did not match any alphabet's pride. Scratchings of a child who had been taught that writing lives in holy fear of sound. The seal on one chest had been pressed with a small brass die engraved, Noli scrutari, do not pry. The wax was new. The command was old. I ran a fingertip beside the seal. The wax smelled of honey that had lived too long with smoke. Open nothing, Father L. said in the tone of a man reminding you to breathe. We are here for the Index Sanctorum Delatorum. He spoke the Latin softly, unwilling to make a habit of naming absences. The index of deleted saints lay in a long box wrapped in linen that had once been white and had elected to remain gray. I expected drama, a gust of cold, a rumor of bells, the soft authority of a ghost. I received paper, the dryness of it, the papery paperness that makes even reverent men reach for a cup of water. We turned the first leaf as one turns a face to the light, carefully, kindly, prepared to see the damage. In the margin, a thin sentence in a nun's consistent hand, not unholy, unuseful. The entry that followed was precise, domestic, a recipe for subtracting a feast day. It did not read like murder. It read like housekeeping. We copied, not mechanically, but as if our copying were itself a mercy. Name, emblem, feast, reason for erasure. The reasons were gentle, on paper, duplication. Confusion with local cult, harmonization of calendars. Gentle words, their teeth showed in the gaps. Saint Quietus, patron of honest doubt, removed for encouraging scruples. Saint Brigid-with-the-Other-Flames, trimmed into a general Brigid, Saint Cleophan, whose legend overlapped too generously with a bishop required for a different story. "They are not dead," Father L. said, without looking at me. "They are sleeping elsewhere." "Where?" He smiled. "Where we keep stories that are too true to be useful, vary as faith and divry. It is a vulgar habit mine, perhaps yours, to imagine conspiracy with capes and passwords, to upholster it in velvet, to seat it at a round table and give it a ring. The underrooms were not theatrical. They were meticulous. Butter paper, pencil stubs, a brush kept in oil so stray soot would not travel onto a map like an accidental star. Everything wore the uniform of the sensible. That is how you hide a cathedral inside a cupboard. You make the cupboard honest about being a cupboard and tire everyone who wants a cathedral." We pushed on into Cartographia Tacita, silent cartography. The drawer handles looked like bones that had decided to be useful. I ran a knuckle across one and felt, absurdly, the sense memory of winter sunlight on a windowsill when you are 10 and the house is quiet because your mother is reading. The drawer did not care about my sentiment. It opened with a breath. Inside, maps that had been measured not from coastlines, but from lights, thin arcs and crosshairs, the symbols of the wandering planets pricked into vellum that swallowed pricks without complaint. I traced a line from chapel to chapel. The path did not lead to a door. It led to an hour. "These are not routes," I said. "They're appointments." Father L. nodded. "Sometimes a place is a time with better manners. In Mater Bove. Remorsi." He showed me the spare calendar, a bound sequence of years that had never touched a farmer's field. Long winters that had occurred for nobody. Summers invented to solve a line in a prophecy. The script did not apologize. One of the margins. Another nun's hand. When nuns write without being told to write for men, they cease being tidy and become true, said, "We were told to fold a blanket. We folded a year instead. We copied the tables. We did not ask who had slept beneath that blanket. We are taught early not to pity numbers. Numbers pity no one in return. Our supplies were ordinary in ways that felt like excellent jokes. A pencil, a knife from an old famine sharpened for new bread, a cloth that had wiped a bishop's brow during a heat wave now wiping dust from a star in the corner of a chart. The implied intimacy of objects makes men religious. I would never admit it aloud, not then. I prayed with my hands. I prayed by cleaning. We all worship provincial gods when the official ones grow too tall. At a table meant for 8 careful readers and occupied by 2, we found a box of Thesaurus Miraculorum Redactorum, the reduced miracles. Inside, artifacts returned deliberately to their ordinariness, a lens that once made a saint's vision plausible in candlelight, now merely polished glass. A compass whose needle, gilded and adored, had been convinced through patient demonstration to be a needle again. A bone that had become wood the way a man becomes what he always was when the story lets go. Each had a label written like a blessing withheld. Returned to process. Relocated to use. Apologized to and shelved. We are allowed to laugh at our own rituals, but only in rooms that cannot keep a secret. The first bend came without thunder. I was measuring by candle the distance between 2 cabinets when the flame lengthened without brightening. I say lengthened, the way you might say a cat lengthens when it hears something in the next room. The body changes proportions, a geometry of suspicion. The wick did not shrink at the appropriate rate. The ledger wants numbers. I gave it numbers. The margin wants truth. I gave it fear. Flame became a line. Time accepted the mistake as if it had been waiting to. I thought of writing portent and decided I did not want a word like that to learn my hand. Good, said Father L. Seeing what I had not written, portents dress the trivial in royal clothes. We do not flatter accidents. We simply don't repeat them. He took the candle, pinched it out with an iron cap, and brought a fresh taper to life with the unastonished care of a cook relighting the stove. We will remark the furniture, he said, and chalked a mark at the height where the flame had tried to become proud. To your ear, all this must sound like foreplay before thunder. The stairs, the chests, the fur of dust, the lamps that refused to flicker, the books that remembered other temperatures, the chain singing its small single pitch. You want a door. I give you doors, 3 that never learned to open, 1 that pretended to be a wall, 5 that led to broom closets crowded with mops that curved like question marks. We labeled every one. The labels did not make the rooms obedient. They made us comprehensible to ourselves. Janua Memoriae, ostium intercalare, porta ad nihilum, ostiolum imaginum, ostium archivi securi. We were instructed to say the names silently, lips moving without voice in the way an actor rehearses alone backstage. Names are leashes, said my superior. Do not yank, do not drop, do not wrap them around your own throat. I would lie if I told you I was never greedy. Greed is a young man's genius. Mine woke in the map room. There was a sheet unlike the others, heavier, coarser, as if cow had refused to become parchment without keeping a muscle or two. It showed Rome twice, once as we walk it, and once as a set of alignments keyed to stars that have since learned other names. Between 2 small churches, a line like a harp string quivered in my skull. I looked up. In the far corner, a lamp that had not been lit trembled as if remembering its job. I turned back to the map and saw, faintly, a second line drawn in a different hand, a corrective by a ghost who had become impatient with modesty. The margin read, "Slightly west in summer." My hand, traitorous, careful wrote the correction into the ledger with a note for future careful hands. Only when air tastes of thunder. He's assast. We moved to the scriptorium minor, where the air's dust arranged itself into columns like scholars at prayer. There I met the elder who filed what did not fit. A woman with a voice like linen folded correctly the first time. She did not look at me. She looked at my hands to decide whether I would be permitted to do more than sharpen pencils. He writes like a man worried about running out of paper, she said. Good. Worry will keep him from making continents out of commas. She set before me a gospel from the memory of Mary, the one that bled ink at the edges in a way I had mistaken in my novice enthusiasm for romance. She taught me to place blotting paper like gauze, not to stop the wound, but to encourage it to close. We do not have the right to fix what time is doing, she said, only the obligation to help time finish gracefully. Hours below metabolize differently. Bread becomes an idea. Water becomes a sacrament. I learned to drink slowly and to eat by listening to the sound my jaw made. You think I am wandering. I am not. A man's chewed silence has to learn the pitch of a room. This is how you are admitted without your name being written in a ledger you won't be allowed to read. A courier brought a request from the world above, a mundane thing, a scholar's petition dressed in bows. Verification of a feast day, aligned to retrograde of Saturn in relation to the dedication of a minor altar. We retrieve such requests with the care of men collecting eggs. The answer lived somewhere between a shelf and a season. I found the shelf. Father L. found the season. We met in the middle and wrote the date with the mutual respect of bridge builders who will not be permitted to cross first. Before we replaced the volume, I asked the small question that a quiet man can hide inside a larger errand. Why keep the deleted? I said. Why not let them evaporate? These rumens. The most time, because nothing, he said, disappears without practicing. He closed the book as one closes a child's eyes in a bedtime story, slowly, kindly. We are the practice. We keep the rehearsal halls clean. When the world needs to forget something, it must forget it correctly. You want a colder sentence. Here it is. There is a ledger titled Memoriae Redacta, Memory Reduced. It is a cookbook for erasure. Its first instruction is kindness. Its second is patience. Its third is never sign with your full name. I did not copy it. I remember it anyway. We ended the round in a corridor that claimed not to be a corridor. It bent left then right without being seen to bend. The lamps did not like it. One by one their halos migrated to the ceiling as if they wished to be stars and then thought better of it. In the exact middle, mathematically exact, I mean, the way a circle's point is exact, and everywhere I smelled the metal sour note of a coin between teeth. Void pressed its cool cheek to mine. I did not step back. Count, said Father L. 12, I said, looking at the candles. No, he said. Count the absence. I waited for cleverness to present itself. None did. I did what children do, playing hide and seek when they cannot find the seeker. I counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. At 7, the corridor exhaled as if relieved to be noticed. At 11, the far lamp, a lamp no one had lit, chose to be light for the length of a single blink. We wrote it down. Lamp E assumed function for a blink. No flame present, no heat. We do not editorialize. We become furniture, but furniture witnesses. On the way upstairs, patient now, forgiving, we passed a fresco I had not seen on the way down, a seraph measuring shadow with a rod. The Latin caption had been softened by fingers. Mensura temporis. Someone had added, in a different hand, a subscript almost too faint to trust. Mensura oblivionis, the measure of forgetting. I touched the stone with the back of my knuckles, the way a boy tests a pan to see if it will burn him. Cool. Honest, the kind of cool that encourages lies to nap. Do not memorize what can be written, my superior liked to say, and do not write what should be forgotten by muscle. He meant that not all memory belongs to paper. He meant that some truths behave better when stored in the bend of a knuckle or the angle at which you hold a lamp. He meant, although he would never admit it, that the body is a better conspirator than the mind. That night, in my cell above the rooms that believe they are the world, I sharpened my famine knife and dulled it on purpose at the tip. I did not want it too eager. I wrote the day's entries in a small hand that looked like someone else's small hand. I folded the page along the crease that had learned its task. I blew out the candle with the trained patience of a man blowing on soup in a house where noise is taxed. Sleep approached like a clerk with a list. I told it I had nothing to declare. It smiled, the smile of necessary harm. It checked my pockets anyway. It found a ribbon's mild tremor, a nun's margin, a saint's name that had agreed to be less than itself for the sake of a calendar, a lamp that pretended to remember being a star. It found the number 11 sitting in my chest like a coin I could not spend. It left me a receipt, a dream of stairs that counted me as I went down, then up, then down again, and when I reached the landing with the fresco, the seraph had become a scribe, and the rod had become a pencil, and the shadow being measured was my own. I woke with wax on my fingers and the smell of copper on my tongue. On the desk lay the label I had failed to write the night before, the tin cool as a winter window. I wrote it without looking, muscles remembering what the mind pretended to have misplaced. Janua Memoriae, observe, do not approach. In the silence after the period, the room listened. The night below listened back, and for the first time since I was entrusted with a ring of keys that chimed like caution, I understood that the house we kept was not only theirs, it was also ours as long as we remembered the stairs by smell, and addressed the doors by their proper names, and accepted that some candles exist to measure nothing but the courage it takes to stand beside them and count. The first time I suspected that time had a ledger of its own, it was a small indecency with a clock. Not our clocks, their hands were ceremonial, like bishops processing in beautiful hats toward decisions already made. This was a pocket watch. A visiting archivist had smuggled in his vest, an heirloom that ticked with the earnest self-importance of little machines. He wanted to test a legend quietly, to see whether the Intercalation Gate would embarrass a good watch. We discouraged such pettiness. The rooms do not reward curiosity that brings its own applause. He showed me the face in his palm-white, prim, convinced of noon, and asked me only to look away. I refused. He smiled, the greedy smile of a man who thinks he is about to confirm a friend. We stood in the corridor, a respectful distance from the iron, the candles set to witness, their inches measured, their wicks accounted for like parishioners of wax. His watch lost a minute. The candles did not. He paled. Magnets, he whispered, as if accusing a conjurer of thread. I shrugged, in the bureaucratic way we cultivated as armor. Air is a discipline here, I said. Some minutes have been trained better than others. He never came back. The rumor that followed him up the stairs was kind to him and cruel to the house. The basilica, he said, eats seconds. He was wrong, in the way a poet is wrong, when he insists the moon belongs to wolves. The basilica eats nothing. It keeps accounts. It balances books we do not know how to read. We provide the pencils. We developed a vocabulary around such discourtesies. Phantom time did not begin as a theory. It began as an apology, what we said, when a number preferred its own arithmetic. The phrase resembled a magician's silk scarf. Colorful, harmless, distracting from the hand. Father L. disliked it. Time is never a phantom, he said. You cannot haunt something that governs whether haunting is possible. Spare time is more honest. Spare as in the extra key under the flower pot. Spare as in the blanket over the back of the pew in winter. Spare as in the year we keep folded because the weather is too proud to be predictable. Very one other ziver. The spare calendar lived, in those days, in a locked case that insisted on being dusted, as if dust could reassure it that it belonged in the furniture family. It was a bound folio of years that served like shims slipped beneath wobbly tables. A harvest out of sync with a festival? The spare supplied a year to lean on. A prophecy arriving prematurely like a guest who ignores the printed time? The spare volunteered to be remembered later. Anyone can add and subtract days. Children do it when the bell rings. Years require a staff. The folio's first leaf wore a title that tried to be modest and failed. De temporibus intercalatis et elendis, on inserted and nourished times. Nourished, as if years were calves kept over winter. The author's hand was steady and reluctant. I recognized the script from a penitent who had learned to write while learning to repent. The second leaf was a table, columns of rains, eclipses, famines, comets, and the recurring housekeeping of the moon. In the margins, the strongest hand belonged to a nun who gave dates the way a good cook gives salt, more than the recipe wants when the guests are sad. "We carried this January on our backs," she wrote beside a winter that refused to arrive for the bishop's schedule. "No harm done. Snow prefers to enter by the sacristy. Questions bloom in your head like mold on bread if you let them. Why invent a century? Why fold a year like linen and store it in a vault? Was it merely vanity? Power's usual appetite? We were taught not to dramatize. We were taught to behave as if someone had to sharpen the pencils for the Almighty. Yet the patterns that lived between the columns grew bolder under my pencil. When I traced eclipses against crusades, the shadows lay down like well-trained dogs at the exact feet required for speeches. When I cross-referenced comets with councils, the sky behaved as if it loved an agenda. Coincidence, my superior suggested in the indulgent voice of men who prefer politeness to precision. He was not wrong. Coincidence is a country where more truth lives than either side admits. But I could not unsee the hospitality with which the world seemed to welcome edits that simplified sermons. Behind the spare calendar case, a narrow drawer slept with a key stuck sadly in its mouth. I was not instructed to open it. I opened it anyway because opening drawers is how archivists breathe. Inside lay a set of census candles, tapers etched like yardsticks, each segment initialed by hands from different decades, hands that had learned to shave wax into fractions. The notches were talkative. Sermon cut 30 breaths short at Intercalation Gate. Blessing lasted longer than minutes allow. Fever fell when Wick reached the letter H. Such notes would embarrass a scientist. They were not science. They were gossip that had learned discipline. We used those candles in the corridor once, and only once while I was a man with keys. The candle did not lie. I did. I wrote what the ledger wanted, and tucked the candle back into its drawer with an apology I whispered into the wick. Wax listens. It is the most forgiving ear. "Forgive me," I said. "We are measuring something with rulers that did not ask to be rulers." The candle smelled faintly of honey and churches that take their heat from bodies. The index of deleted saints learned to look at me with a patience that shook. We did not resurrect, we annotated. Saints who had been trimmed for duplication reappeared in marginalia, like polite ghosts learning to cough before entering a room. Saint Quietus, for honest doubt, surfaced again beside a controversial footnote in a hagiography. "Caution, scruples are not sins unless weaponized," someone had written, and in the corner, a tiny Q in a circle. Saint Brigid-with-the-Other-Flames, consigned to the broom closet of liturgical harmonization, left fingerprints in a manuscript of miracles near a kiln. Saint Cleophon, the one whose face fit too many stories, became a silhouette in a border, a figure carrying no attribute at all, as if daring readers to admit they recognized him. Deletion behaves like a tide that a child insists has not returned. It returns while the child sleeps. The theory grew by refusal. Every time I reached for a grand explanation, the rooms yawned and adjusted a chair. Answer only what the furniture asks. Father L. would murmur, old enough to disguise kindness as mockery. Is a particular January here or not? Which calendar is the ankle bone and which is the shoe? Does the candle behave like a priest or like a clock? He was not being cruel. He knew how men like me drown, not in deep water, but in footnotes. Yet he was the one who put my hand on the Intercalation Gate the night the watch lost its minute. Whistle, he said, and when I did, the echo came back older, not slower older, the way a laugh becomes a cough in winter. He nodded, as a doctor nods when a symptom agrees with a textbook he dislikes. Now you owe a minute to a coin you will never spend. He saw my confusion and added, they count such debts. The house never duns you. It simply remembers what you can afford. I began to annotate my own days, the way we annotated saints. Morning, woke with copper on tongue. Noon, map refused touch of wooden stylus. Accepted bone. Evening, wick shortened in the absence of flame near door of memory. In the margins of my margins, I built a glossary of unhelpful words that nevertheless kept me from asking for worse ones. Older echo, a return sound fatigued by travel within an untraveled corridor. Thin shadow, darkness that behaves as if fasting. Kindness, the discipline of not looking when looking would be a theft. A secular man would call this superstition. A devout man would call it humility. I called it a method that let me sleep with only one candle lit. Maps became my favorite disobedience. The silent cartography drawers were schools where I learned to forgive lines for being in love with themselves. A map that aligns chapels with planets is not wrong. It merely imagines worship as choreography. One sheet, pricked with stardust, overlaid Rome with a web of angles that made the city look like a harp tuned to Jupiter. In summer, the lines shifted slightly west, the way a man changes his stance when a friend enters the room. A nun's note corrected a fussy brother with a single sentence. The earth inhales. The map may breathe with it. I added a correction of my own, then crossed it out. The map did not want a chorus of modest men. It wanted a listener who would let it conclude. Near the maps, a thin cabinet kept popes intercalated. Portraits of faces that repeated like rhymes. Rings stamped with letters that do not belong to the learned alphabets. Dates that filled gaps, the way good carpenters do not invisibly, but with a flourish that lets the next hand know where the joint lives. We did not pronounce fraud in those rooms. Fraud is a word with teeth. It leaks into walls. We preferred inserted, supplied, harmonized. Harmony can hide almost anything. A face that returned after 50 years with a slightly different scar was, in our notes, a regularity for the sake of comfort. I wrote it and felt the sentence look back at me like a friend I did not deserve. Do you want the heresy stated plainly? The spare calendar did not only fix summers for saints, it replaced audiences for speeches. It supplied winters to numb, angry hands. It gave childhoods to men who needed to weep convincingly on a balcony. No one wrote those entries with malice. Malice is sloppy. These were careful edits by careful people in careful rooms, people who believed, and here is the sin that wears a pilgrim's cloak, that they were helping truth arrive on time. The body compounds theories, the way a throat learns a tune by hearing footsteps. My sleep began to keep count. I woke with numbers in my mouth. 11 visited often and sat like a coin under the tongue. Once I opened my eyes to a taste like iron filings and found, beside the lamp, a note in my own hand. I did not remember writing. Do not speak the number in the corridor. Write it once. Let the wall finish the math. I obeyed instructions I could not afford to disobey. The wall was a better accountant. I have said nothing of the ostiolum imaginum, the lesser door of images, because images do not respect chapters, they enter where they please. But in this season of suspicion and arithmetic, I stood there one night and let it breathe on me. A door that is not a door opens without moving. The view inside was a page turning itself, a calendar leaf torn carefully so that the year remained unnamed, a saint's statue missing its plaque, a ring pressed into sealing wax that had already decided to forget. They were scenes, not places. They drifted on black water that did not wet the threshold. I wrote a label, admission, by humility, only. Then I crossed the label out and wrote the truth. Admission denied. The room, if we insist on calling it a room, accepted my honesty by taking a breath and letting it go. In the scriptorium minor, the elder with the folded linen voice set before me a codex that bled at the edges. You may read the first line, she said, and only if you promise to hum afterward. I promised. The rubric called it Evangelium ex Memoriae Mariae Gospel, from the memory of Mary. The line was domestic. I remember the smell of his hair after he slept by the sea. I hummed and hummed until my chest unknotted. The ink dried as if the page had decided not to keep crying in public. Why the humming? I asked. Because if the room thinks you are a choir, she said, it will remember you as plural and be kinder. There are superstitions that are merely good manners in rooms that do not practice any. Not all theories deserve names. One deserves one, mnemonic sovereignty. Father L. said it like a man spitting a seed into a napkin. The power to decide what a people is allowed to remember, he said, softer than any prayer. Not erasure, not censorship, ownership. He wrote nothing down. He made me write it. If it passes through your hand, he said, you will be less tempted to pretend it was an accusation I forced upon you. The phrase sat on the page like a nail waiting for wood. After that, we stopped pretending the spare calendar was only a tool for arithmetic. It was also a loom. Memory is cloth. Once woven, it makes a modest skirt for power. Still, we did not rage. Rage burns, inches of wick intended to measure breath. We did not have inches to spare. We kept working. We answered requests that came down the stairs smelling of rain and authority. Verify alignment of feast with retrograde of Saturn. Locate earliest mention of Saint Eudora's lamp that did not burn out. Confirm whether the plague of crows preceded the treaty or followed the spring planting. We fetched, we copied, we annotated, we returned the world's questions. With the kindness of clerks who know the asker will ignore the caveats. Once we returned a request unopened. The seal had been stamped with a ring we did not recognize, a letter from an alphabet that prefers dark iron to ink. My superior touched it with the back of his knuckles and shook his head. Above our salary, he said. He placed it on a shelf that had been carved to look like a shelf. Weeks later, the letter was gone. The dust outline remained. Dust has jurisdiction where papers pretend to be braver than men. You want a moment with edges. Here, it was late, the last wick. I had returned a chain to its hook after logging a miracle, returned to process a weeping statue that wept because the roof wept. I was writing the modest truth of water when the corridor shifted as if a man had changed his mind. Not a tremor, not a draft. The lamps remembered the ceiling fondly and lifted their halos toward it. I stood beneath their fidelity and counted absence under my breath. 1, 2, 3 at 7. The air reconciled with itself. At 11, it did not. The number lodged. I wrote it. I blew out a candle with a cap so the wick would not feel betrayed. I placed my pencil beside the ledger, and the ledger, dusty, tired, an object longing to be a different sort of wood, closed itself a finger's width, as if embarrassed by its own openness. Later, upstairs, washing my hands in a basin that insisted on being a bowl, I saw the water hesitate on the back of my knuckles, as if having to decide whether I deserved rinsing. I laughed, quietly, to ease the basin's pride. "You are only water," I told it, "the way men tell the sea it is only itself." It forgave me and fell in a sheet. I dried my hands on a towel that had known bishops and apples. In the mirror, I looked like a man who had stayed too long in a chorus and begun to suspect he was singing alone. The Memoriae Redacta, the cookbook for erasure, haunted me. No, haunted is wrong. It abided. It waited on a shelf I passed daily, small, gray, titled in a hand that argued with itself about how fancy to be. I opened it once at random and found a recipe for removing a feast day that read like instructions for taking a splinter from a child's finger. Warm water, soft light, patience. Do not lie to the child about the pain. Promise a sweet afterward, and keep the promise. I closed it. I preferred my sins without craftsman's pride. On the night the watch lost its minute, I dreamt a staircase that changed direction when I reached for the banister, the way a cat moves just as your hand arrives. In the dream, I counted absence and woke saying 11 aloud. My mouth tasted of coin. On the desk, my famine knife lay where I had left it, dulled at the tip in an attempt to make it shy. Beside it, a label waited. Ostium intercalare, do not stand between flame and hinge. I hadn't written it. My hand had. I tied the hair thread and hung the tin where it belonged. The knot remembered a previous knot and settled into it with relief. The corridor, pleased to be arranged, exhaled like an old man easing into a chair. You would be forgiven for thinking that after so many small obediences, I would be ripe for an extravagant rebellion. But treachery is not the fruit of humiliation. It is the fruit of method that discovers it has a conscience. I did not plan anything. I planned labels. I planned inches of wick. I planned which hand would hold which lamp. The house planned the rest. The theory of phantom time grew a second face. In one mirror, it was comfort, the means by which a culture forgave itself for being late. In the other, it was jurisdiction, the power by which a few permitted themselves to locate the present where it best served their safety. Both faces wore their makeup well. Both lied to themselves kindly. I made a third mirror out of an index card and wrote a sentence I have never shown anyone. If time can be edited, kindness must be too made longer in rooms where we shorten years. I folded the card and hid it in a spine that did not open easily. The book will remember it long after my dust consents to be harmless. We are close to the point where you will demand thunder. I have none to give you tonight. The basement prefers drizzle. Instead, I offer a chime, the smallest key on my ring, which belonged to a cabinet I did not open, rang by itself when I passed the door of memory. After a day I would call ordinary if I wished to flatter my superiors. The key rang a note that matched imperfectly the hum that keeps men's mouths honest in silent places. The corridor listened. The lamp at position E attempted light again and achieved a tremor heatless. Embarrassed, I wrote it down. The ledger accepted my entry the way a cat accepts an apology, with disdain disguised as boredom. Before I slept, I visited the fresco of the seraph measuring shadow. Someone had cleaned it. The Latin caption shone with the sarcasm of freshly rescued letters, mensura temporis. Below it, almost shy, the subscript I had seen with the back of my eyes, mensura oblivionis, had been touched by a merciful cloth. It glowed faintly, the way a bruise glows when the skin is new again. I put my knuckles to the stone. The cool was honest and undeserved. I thanked it for not asking my name. If you are still awake, you already know what I am trying to confess. Not that men in rooms invented seasons and lent their weather to kings, though that is part of it. Not that saints were folded like letters and filed under too true to be useful, though that is also part. Not that doors that do not open nevertheless breathe. Not that candles are truer than clocks in corridors where iron thinks, yes, yes, all that. I am trying to confess that I began to love the accuracy of small mercies more than the safety supplied by larger lies. That is the shape treachery takes when it wishes to eat quietly. In the ledger, I added one more column that no one had asked for and that no one, in my hearing, ever noticed. It was blank unless a day deserved it. I titled it with a letter only I recognized, a crooked initial to keep me honest. The first time I wrote in it, I wrote only this: the candle told the truth and did not ask to be thanked. Then I closed the book and sealed the room in the oldest way we know. I hummed the closure, tone 3 notes, patient as bread rising, and let the night do what it has always done, better than any church or clock. It remembered us. It remembered the doors. It remembered the chairs and the dust and the saints sleeping elsewhere. And it remembered the minute the watch lost, as if minutes were coins boys drop from balconies to hear them click against a world that forgives falling. Above us, the city composed its mourning. Below, we stacked spare time like folded sheets and told ourselves we were housekeepers. Perhaps we were. Perhaps the house deserved better. Perhaps the house was grateful. My keys, obedient, chimed their approval like insects tapping a window. Sleep now, if you can. The numbers will keep their own company for a while. I will keep walking. I will take the long way past the ostiolum imaginum to see if the water inside has learned any new pictures. I will count the absence and stop at 7. I will wait for 11 to arrive like a friend with poor timing. I will write what can be borne. I will close what cannot, gently, with a tone that pretends to be music and is only, blessedly, a permission to rest. Thinking, I learn to recognize the breath a room takes when it is about to lie politely. It is not a draft, not a chill, not the melodrama of a curtain lifting. It is the way air becomes considerate, stepping aside so that a story can pass without scuffing its shoes. In the scriptorium minor, the air had perfect manners. It made room for erased names. We called the ledger Index Sanctorum Deletorum, as if Latin could make subtraction gentle. The book lay longwise in its linen, spine tired, corners learning the habit of bruises. I turned a page and found the recipe voice. Again, the domestic tone that explains how to fold the day so it fits in a drawer. Name, emblem, feast, reason for removal. The reasons were a liturgy of tidiness, duplication, conflation, harmonization with universal calendars, regional excess. I copied with the steadiness of a pair of hands washing a small plate. But the margins did not accept subtraction without commentary. Nuns argued softly with bishops in needle-fine notes. Brothers corrected themselves and then apologized to their own ink. Saint Quietus, patron of honest doubt, removed for encouraging scruples that paralyze duty. In the margin, a nun wrote, "Scruple is the hand that shakes before it blesses, and thereby remembers it is a hand." A bishop's note crossed her with a ruler straight line. Duty cannot afford tremors. Someone else, no rank. Just a hand with a crooked knuckle added a dot beside the crossing, a punctum that meant, in the shorthand of the underrooms, scene. Saint Brigid-with-the-Other-Flames, harmonized into the larger Brigid to avoid the inconvenience of multiple candles in 1 week. Her oven remains her own, a cook scribe wrote, a joke that sounded like a prayer. Saint Cleophan, excised for overlapping legends, his face too adaptable to be trusted. In a border, a silhouette with no attributes walked across a field of modest blue. If you know him, you know him, someone dared to write, then scratched out the sentence, as if ashamed of having said out loud what saints and neighbors share. We did not resurrect. We filed. We practiced a mercy that pretended to be paperwork, the comfort of a shelf, the equality of labels, the promise never kept but never quite withdrawn, that sleeping elsewhere counts as sleeping. Father L. taught me to read the negative space as diligently as the ink. Erasure leaves a print, he said. Do not confuse the absence of letters with the absence of shape. He pressed my fingertips to a page where a name had been burnished away centuries ago, skin to skin with smoothness that had learned to be proud. The gone name hummed faintly, like a string tuned to a note no choir sings anymore. Opposite the saints, in an aisle that smelled like apples kept in a cool room through January, the Thesaurus Miraculorum Redactorum, the reduced miracles, kept its own polite confessions. I lifted a lid and found a lens in a frame of wire. It had once belonged to a story about sight, a saint who saw the future by connecting the present to the precise edge of light. The story had acquired jewelry and baths and a procession. The lens had acquired a reliquary and a locked box and a queue of gullible elbows. Tested patiently under honest flame and indifferent moon, the lens behaved like polished glass. The label written in the ledger was kinder than truth, returned to process. A small line added in a woman's hand. We thanked it for trying. Next to it, a compass whose needle had been gilded into obedience slowly remembered iron again under the tutelage of demonstration. A monk who loved ships explained patiently to the needle that north is not a punishment. The needle, after days of sulking, agreed. Its label read, "Harmonized with use." Another box held a bone that had been loved into relic by villages that needed heat in their prayers. The bone was wood, as wood had always wanted to be. We did not mock the villages. We shelved the wood and let it keep its memory of hands. We practiced the ritual we called the return. It required 3 small virtues: steadiness, humility, and silence. The steadiness was for the instruments. The humility was for the story. The silence was for us. We spoke only to the page. Weight, heat. Refraction, refusal. The more ordinary an object became beneath our questions, the kinder our writing grew. Honest glass, wood accepted. Iron forgiven its costume, the rooms liked this tone. They rewarded it with the warmth that follows work. Across the aisle, a case held a text I had promised to treat like a bowl of water carried toward a sleeping child. Evangelium ex Memoriae Mariae Gospel from the Memory of Mary. The first time I opened it, the ink had bled at the edges, as if the page were still wet from grief. The elder of the scriptorium linen voice, hands that preferred gauze to argument, taught me the tone of closure. 3 notes, low, unaspiring, a tether for air. Hum, she said, until your own breath stops trying to be a sermon. I hummed, and the ink dried with the dignity of a wound consenting to scar. I copied a line that made the room lean closer. He smelled of salt and cedar after sleeping by the sea. Not doctrine, not polemic, not weapon, memory, the kind that makes history nervous, because it cannot be summarized without becoming smaller than itself. Why is this not filed with the Apocrypha? I asked. Because Apocrypha is a room with a bad reputation, she said. This belongs with linens washed and hung to dry. She saw my confusion. You shelve laundry near skin, not near weapons. We kept going. We opened popes, intercalated portraits like rhymes, dates like joints shimmed to stop a floor from squeaking under a parade. The faces fit holes left by inconvenient timing. A ring stamped with a letter that exists only under old iron sat in a velvet that pretended it had never met hands. We did not say fraud. We wrote, inserted, supplied, stabilized words that sound like carpentry and mercy sawed from the same board. In the margin of one portrait, a small X in a circle marked the place where an earlobe had been painted twice. A novice's correction? A joke? An admission? The paint pretended to be paint. The room pretended to be patient. We wrote the room's patience into the ledger so it would not have to perform twice. I asked the wrong question and was rewarded with the right answer. If this is forgery, I said, why do it modestly? Why not paint a brilliance and demand belief? Because brilliance breaks too soon, said Father L. Hammers are for doors that already want to open. The long work, the work that lasts, is small. A calendar trimmed here, a feast moved there, a face repeated with enough difference to feel familiar even to those who insist on novelty. Large lies recruit armies, small ones hire clerks. The word that had lodged like a seed beneath my tongue sprouted then. Mnemonic sovereignty. Ownership not of events, but of what a body of people is permitted to remember without being declared mad or rude. It is not censorship, which is a shout. It is insulation, which is a kindness offered at a price. The price is curiosity. The receipt is peace. We filed the receipts with the stamps. I hesitated to write the next part. And so, to keep my courage tidy, I will write it as it happened, without drama, without sound that thinks too highly of itself. In a box labeled modestly Claves Arcani, Keys of the Secret, I found a ring of 7 small blanks. Blanks do not frighten sensible men. These did. Each key had teeth, initially invisible until held near the Intercalation Gate, where their edges accepted light that the lamp had not offered. Lettering glowed without glow, a script for men who accept that some alphabets refuse to be ink. The ring was heavy like a purse filled with the wrong coins. The label asked for a replacement in clearer hand. My hand shook. I wrote claves ad portas vacui keys to the void doors, and I could not help myself, I added, in letters so small that only men who deserved to would read them, not for opening, for admitting that we will never open. Good, said Father L., reading the tiny treason. Confession is a better lock than iron. He let me keep the ring for one night, to teach your pocket humility, he said, as if pockets learn morals when you ask them to carry the weight of a secret. The keys chimed like winter coins, with nowhere honest to be spent. I slept with them under my pillow the way children sleep with questions they are not ready to ask. The next morning, the Memoriae redacta, the cookbook for erasure, found me again. I did not open where I wished. I opened where the book wished. How to remove a feast without unhousing a people. The steps were ridiculous in their tenderness. Speak the reason aloud once. Do not rehearse. Offer a consolation feast, a local harvest, a grandmother's recipe, a saint who minds children while mothers wash floors. Write a letter to the year, explaining why you are borrowing its Sunday. Never say abolish, say fold. Keep one candle lit in the dark chapel for a week, but do not tell anyone why. If you think this nonsense, you have not watched a village survive a policy. The book had, in the Cartographia Tacita, the silent maps rehearsed patience before an audition none of them had been promised. A sheet pricked with stardust overlaid Rome with a geometry of devotions. The old wandering lights still walked the margins, with the stubborn pride of symbols that refuse retirement. Lines ran from chapel to chapel, from an ossuary to a well, from a lost altar beneath a pastry shop to the tip of a saint's bronze toe polished by tourists who think they invented rubbing. At certain crossings, candles had been placed historically to make history pretend to behave, a map hand noted. We did not move the candles. We moved our eyes and let the lines land where time, if it were kind, would have wanted them. A drawer below kept borders that apologized. Old coastlines had learned to be wrong and were still mourning. Margins begged forgiveness for rivers that had moved like families. I found a map of a room that did not exist above ground. It showed not walls but views. The turn of a page by no hand, the slow gout of a candle that had been asked to stand too close to a hinge, the mirror of a reliquary reflecting a face not in the room. These are not plans, I told the map, as if the map needed reassurance. You are not responsible for stairs. The map accepted my consolation by allowing its dust to be more honest when I breathed near it. In the afternoon, the courier came from above with a request that smelled of rain cloud and upholstery. Verification requested. Earliest acceptable reference to the feminine gospel in a register that will not alarm donors. I disliked the request more than most. The tone wore velvet gloves to handle fire. I saw the elder's mouth thin. You may bring them truth, she said, but you may not bring them its temperature. We selected passages that behaved. We selected memory that did not scratch the polite throat. We returned a packet with a label that said, suitable for public reading. I signed the ledger and hated the neat person my signature made of me. Evening came the way it comes below, a consensus among objects. The lamps began remembering ceilings more urgently. The candles asked to be counted. The walls relaxed into their seams like actors taking off a face. We prepared to label a wall that had been renamed more times than some men are blessed. An old tin read Porta ad nihilum dor, to no thing, hammered with furious certainty by a hand that liked truth best when it was a slap. A newer plate insisted Ostium archivi securidor of the safe archive, a lie told for morale during a decade when people above preferred their nightmares domesticated. We were to retire the lie without scolding it. "We do not insult previous peace," said my superior. "We only call things what they can bear to be called now." I polished a fresh plate with a cloth that smelled faintly of bell ropes and dust. I cooled the stylus. I wrote, "Janua Memoriae door of memory," and beneath it, "Observe, do not approach." I tied the hair linen thread and let the knot find its predecessor's ghost. The corridor received the correctness with a small courtesy. One lamp, unlit, practiced brightness for a single blink. The air did not chill. It agreed to be honest for a moment and then returned to the kindness of pretending. You will wonder whether the rooms ever shouted, ever refused our labels with the tantrum of a theater child denied a plum. Shouting is for men above who confuse noise with courage. The underrooms were all grammar and consequences. When we were careless, our ink bled. When we were impatient, our candles lengthened into lines, and wasted inches we would prefer to spend on breathing later. When we were proud, the keys chimed an interval that humiliated the ear. We adjusted, we practiced, we apologized. The only time a thing like thunder visited, it arrived as paper. A letter, sealed with a ring whose alphabet enjoyed iron too much, came down with a request that did not ask. Produce proof that the inserted winters were sacrifice for harvest, not for prophecy. The elder touched the seal with the back of her knuckles. "Not ours," she said. We returned the letter to the shelf that was carved to look like a shelf, the one where things wait to rescue themselves. Weeks later, it was gone. The dust outline remained with the dignity of a witness who cannot be called. There is a story I could put here to sharpen your attention. I could tell you of a bishop who came by night, who touched the Intercalation Gate with ceremonial fingers and found his ring colder afterward than a prayer said for show. But the truth is more useful when it is not recruited to flatter our appetite for anecdotes. What matters is that the house ran on forms, not gasps. We stamped wax that declined to remember being warm. We initialed entries that would outlive our dust. The unimaginable had an inbox. I emptied it with 2 hands and a humility borrowed from laundry. The day I forgave myself for loving these tasks was the day I found an eraser made of bread, wrapped in cloth like a relic. The crumbs bore pencil lead, evidence of 100 small unlies. I used it to erase a boast I had made in a margin years earlier, observed without assistance. I had not. A woman had hummed the closure tone from a room away to steady my hand. I erased the pride and wrote, "With kindness from unseen choir." The ledger did not brighten. The room did. The key in my pocket chimed the note of a lock that has remembered doors can be honored without being used. Night approached the way a cat approaches a careful man. Curiosity without permission. I visited the fresco of the seraph, measuring shadow. Someone had washed its face. The caption, "Mensura temporis," confessed itself with clean vowels. Beneath it, the subscript "Mensura oblivionis," the measure of forgetting, had been outlined lightly in the kind of chalk that promises to go away when wiped and secretly hopes to remain in the pores. I put my knuckles to the stone. It was cooler than the lamp believed. "What is the measure?" I asked the wall, because Men like me ask walls questions we have no intention of letting a priest hear. The wall, honest as always, did not answer. It allowed my voice to be the only sound for a breath, and then gave the sound back older by half a second. That was answer enough. Before sleep, I reshelved the gospel from the Memory of Mary. I laid the blotting paper like a blanket. I hummed a closure tone that knew it was not music. The elder watched me with the private satisfaction of a teacher who has made herself unnecessary. "You have learned not to hurry tenderness," she said. "Hurry is the tool of editors who think years are theirs." She opened her hand to reveal a crumb of bread eraser. "Keep this," she said. "You may need to make room for the truth you forgot to allow." I walked the corridor once more, counting absence under my breath the way a child counts to calm himself in a dark pantry. At 7, the lamps agreed with one another. At 11, the key in my pocket sighed sympathetically. I paused at the ostiolum imaginum, the lesser door of images, and let it look at me as one allows a portrait to adjust to a visitor. The water of pictures inside arranged itself into a view I had not yet granted it. A table laid for a dull supper. Knives face down, spoons content, 8 places set and occupied by no one. A label sat waiting by the threshold. I wrote "Admit" without touching and left the tin there, unlaced. Some doors need a promise more than a leash. On the stairs up, I passed a novice, descending with the stiff grace of a man carrying a spillable secret. He offered me the nod we use in corridors where noise pays a tax. His candle discovered a draft that did not exist before he arrived. Drafts are polite like that. He stopped. "How do you know," he asked to the wall, not to me, "when a miracle deserves to be returned, when it begins to require applause?" I said to the same wall. He nodded to the paint and continued downward, his flame adopting the patience of a good student. I slept above ground like a man who has accepted that the house will continue whether or not he leaves his lamp aligned on the desk. In the night, the keys rang once, a note precise as a pin in a map, and I heard, inside my sleep, the elder's voice. Silence wasn't sacred. It was enforced. But kindness can be sacred if you refuse to enforce it. I woke with bread under my pillow and the taste of cedar and salt on my tongue. In the ledger, a new column waited for me to be brave. I titled it in a letter no one else used and wrote, "Things we return to themselves without shame." The first entry was the lens. The second was my own certainty that erasure is always evil. The third was a year we folded, gently, the way you fold someone's coat when he forgets it at your table and you hope he will come back for it. Morning above composed itself out of bells and pigeons, and water finding its way through old pipes. Morning below composed itself out of pencils, sharpened to modest points, and a fresh page that had forgiven yesterday's weight. I tied on the ring of keys and walked toward the labors that pretend to be small. The house breathed, the doors remembered their names, and the erased and the forged lay where we had left them. Not innocent, not triumphant, but arranged so that when the day came to ask for their story, they could answer without trembling the ink. They were not doors in the way a house keeps a door. A house asks a door to separate weather from supper, children from streets, dogs from pies. The void doors did not separate. They admitted light to doubt, admitted time to arithmetic, admitted men to themselves in a manner that made oaths shiver. We were told, with the politeness reserved for useful servants, that we would never open them. We were given pencils so that our hands would learn a humbler ambition. Still, a door will teach you to imagine crossing. The imagination is a muscle that refuses to retire just because a corridor is tired of being a corridor. We began the long round on a night that did not trouble the surface with drama. Rain negotiated gently with stone. The city forgave the late bells. Below, the air had that considerate quality that meant a room intended to lie politely. I carried the ring of keys that chimed like winter coins, and the elder carried a brush kept in oil, and Father L carried nothing at all, which worried me. Men who carry nothing intend to put their hands on the world itself. The first door on our list was the Janua Memoriae door of memory. Its label was mine. The hair linen thread I'd tied months ago still remembered the knot. A discipline has its own loyalty. The jam wore layers of previous names like a soldier's chest wears medals, each plate insisting that a different decade had needed a different kind of courage. Porta ad nihilum. Ostium archivae securi. Janua Memoriae. A calendar of honesty and morale. The lamp beside it had learned to be humble, no flaring, no sulk, just a halo the size of a bread plate laid on the wall. We were to verify the ledger's columns, lamp behavior, candle consumption, the usual furniture questions, and then proceed to the ostium intercalare, the Intercalation Gate, whose hinge preferred to be admired from an angle. I set the measuring candle, marked in quarters no fingernail should dare to misread, and wrote the initial inches with the neatness of a man ashamed of the excitement in his ribs. "Hum," said the elder, "not as a command but as an allowance." We hummed the three-note closure, the tune that informs air it is being invited to act its age. The walls accepted our maturity by refusing to show off. The candle shortened at an ordinary pace. I wrote "Ord" in the phenomena column, the bureaucrat's sacrament of relief. When we moved on, the corridor did the courteous thing and pretended to be a corridor. We passed the osculum imaginum, the lesser door of images, and allowed it the right to look. Inside, water arranged itself into a view of a table set for 8 with no guests. The elder nodded, as if a child had shown its neatest handwriting. "Behave," she whispered kindly to the picture. It behaved. At the turn, the air thinned, not a chill, not a draft, just the choir in the throat quieting to hear a soloist step forward. The iron of the Intercalation Gate did what iron does when it has decided to become a character. It accepted light without honoring it. It made warmth feel impolite. It remained itself with an obstinacy that deserved a better verb than stayed. The hinge displayed teeth that belonged to an alphabet no one had the vanity to invent. The handle was not a handle. It was a line with ambitions. "Do not whistle," said Father L., though I had learned the discipline of my own mouth years ago. "Do not stand between flame and hinge." I set the candle on its brass saucer against the chalk line a careful predecessor had drawn. The saucer's feet sang a frequency so low the bone behind my ear swore it was innocent. I logged the inches. I uncapped the famine knife-sharpened pencil. I reminded my pulse that numbers are shy. "Count," said the elder softly. "The candles?" I asked. "The absence." I counted under my breath as one counts a child's breaths when the fever is bored with itself. 1, 2, 3. At 7, the corridor exhaled as if relieved to have been noticed. At 11, the lamp at position E unlit, content to be a member of a constellation of furniture, attempted brightness for a heartbeat so brief that even the dust chose to pretend nothing had happened. We moved as we had been trained. We did not praise. We did not scold. We wrote E tremored, no heat, no wick. We circled the number 11 in the shorthand that meant witnessed without appetite. Father L. touched the iron of the gate with 2 fingers, poetically disrespectful, and drew his hand back as if from a stove that had forgotten it was Sunday. "Now," he said, and I heard the tone that had ruined many careful men, the tone of a teacher who intends to demonstrate. He took from his sleeve the ring of claves ad portas vacui, the blank keys that had glowed without glowing when brought near this iron. He did not admit to owning them. Men like us did not own. We were owned by our chores. But the keys had slept beneath his pillow the way mine had, and they knew their owner by the gilt in his pocket. He held one up between finger and thumb so that the gate could smell its intention. The teeth, invisible in ordinary air, accepted a whisper of light the lamp did not claim to provide. "Not to open," I said, in the tone of a floor, "only to admit we will not." "Confession is a better lock than iron," he repeated, smiling with borrowed courage. He pressed the key, not to the keyhole, that vulgarity would have offended both iron and shame, but to the stone beside the hinge, where previous hands had rubbed hope away to powder. The stone behaved with dignity. It remained stone. The iron behaved with a doctor's politeness. It remembered neither patient nor appointment. The candle asked to be counted again. The wick had shortened more than flame could justify. I signed the measurement. The elder nodded, satisfied not by curiosity but by the correctness of honest ink doing honest work. "We will now leave," she said. We did not leave, because a door, uninterested in please and thank you, breathed. Not open, not a hinge moved, not a bolt unlearned. The breath came from a place behind the notion of behind. Imagine a room exhaling into your teeth. It tasted like a coin held too long in a mouth grown polite. The candle lengthened without brightening. I say lengthened to be loyal to the cat body metaphor I have used elsewhere. It became a line, listening for a sound nobody wanted to make. The ring of keys chimed themselves to a note that matched the hum we keep in our throats as a leash on panic. "Step back," said the elder. And we did, an inch that felt like a liturgy. The breath ceased with the offended discretion of a host whose guest has declined wine. The ledger waited. I have never loved any object so much as I loved the readiness of that paper to accept the world without flattering it. I wrote, "Gate exhaled, no draught, no heat. Candle elongated, wick inadequately diminished. Key teeth exhibited acceptance of unoffered light." I wanted to add, "We did not deserve to be spared," but that is not an archivist's sentence, and the ledger already carried its own psalms. We would have left then, if the corridor had not acquired lungs. You will accuse me of metaphor. You will be kind to accuse me of metaphor. I heard the mensura, the measure of a breath in, breath held, breath out, as if the stones had learned childbirth. The ribbon we had not brought hummed in absence. The bells we had not hung considered ringing, and in their consideration told us enough. The elder's mouth opened to say the closure tone. Father L's hand moved to the keyring. My hands betrayed me in the only way I still permit them to betray me. They wrote ahead of my mind. "Do not stand between flame and hinge. Do not hum until the room accepts your plural. Do not imagine crossing. It is an invitation." I did not read what I wrote. I wrote to allow fear to be stored where it would not rot. The gate, seeing that we had remembered the rules, agreed to believe that it had not been tempted. We retreated, not a flight, not even dignity bent into haste. The correct velocity for leaving a room that believes it has done you a favor is the speed of apology. At the Janua Memoriae, we paused because memory demanded we behave ceremoniously at our own label. There, in the most ordinary of ways, the climax arrived not as thunder but as stationary. A courier stood in the dark like a question. He held a letter sealed with wax that liked iron too much. His eyes had the worried confidence of a man whose errand had been rehearsed for him by someone with a louder voice. He bowed the bow of men who have learned that the under rooms tolerate courtesy the way cats tolerate kind children. The elder took the letter and felt the seal with the back of her knuckles. "Not ours," she said, which is how we say danger when we wish to keep our salaries. She set it on the carved shelf that has rescued more men than any prayer, the shelf that is so perfectly a shelf that even commands forget they intended to be obeyed. The dust there had its own calendar. The letter would either unexist elegantly or teach us a new form. It chose the former. When I returned to log the delivery for the sake of our stupid conscience, the dust remembered where paper had slept. The paper remembered elsewhere. "You have seen it now," the elder said, humoring our blood, which wanted a ritual. The administration of the unimaginable. She meant the form we would fill tonight. Gate attempted breath. No invitation offered. Candles consumed according to policy. Staff behaved like furniture. She meant the stamp we would press into the wax we did not trust. She meant the budget entry that would move 2 candlesticks from the intercalation corridor to the map room during summer, because the earth inhales then and the maps breathe with it. She meant the entire architecture of a house that refuses drama, and instead lengthens its corridor of forms until even doors become paperwork. And if I must give you a scene with edges, have this: Father L., whose hands smelled of copper and rosemary, placed my palm upon the gate a second time, an indecency that felt like confession, and said, softly, "Whistle." I did not whistle. The mouth longs to offer its instrument in rooms like this. I had trained mine to be loyal. My non-whistle returned older. Not slower older, the way a laugh becomes a cough in winter. He nodded in the universal grammar of men who recognize the page they hoped they would never have to turn. "You have now lost a minute you will never miss," he said gently. "They count such minutes. They count everything." We left without the sound of victory. The elder took my pencil from my fingers and tucked it behind my ear the way a mother salvages a child's dignity after a failed errand. She hummed the closure tone with her mouth closed. Imagine a lighthouse turning itself down. Father L. pocketed the ring of keys that were not keys, and, for the first time in our companionship, looked as if he had met his match. Not an enemy. Matches are not enemies. A match is the shape of your work when your work has decided to show you its face. Upstairs, we practiced the sacrament of ordinary water. I washed my hands like an apology that knew it would have to be repeated for decades. The basin, loyal to its vocation, decided to be a bowl again and forgave me my metaphors. The elder wiped the letter shelf with a cloth that smelled of bell ropes and clean knees. Dust rearranged itself into courtesy. Father L. held his hand above a lamp and did not wince when no heat greeted him. At the fresco of the seraph measuring shadow, my teacher, my warning, my plausible deniability, I found that someone had outlined the subscript Mensura Oblivionis, the measure of forgetting with a chalk that hoped to be temporary. There is a mischief in chalk. It pretends to be fragile, so that its boldness can be excused. I touched the stone with my knuckles. The cool had learned my pulse. It did not quicken. It did not refuse. It accepted that its duty tonight was to be stone, and it fulfilled that duty with a grace all staff admire but cannot reproduce. I wish I could tell you that the door opened, that iron found its hinge a song, that a wind taught our knees manners. The truth is better for sleep, and crueler for men who asked to be brave. Nothing opened. The door remained a door, the way a grave remains a grave, even when lilies decide to bloom. The climax was not an event, but a recognition that our small labors belonged to a machine that neither loved nor hated us, a machine that counts breath the way a monk counts beats of silence, a house that has made a career of letting history arrive on time. We filled the forms. We used the right ink for rooms that like their vowels to sit upright. We pressed the stamp that seals wax while insulting it. We filed the ledger that confesses for us when we do not know which parts of our night a court would call testimony and which parts a lullaby. I wrote one line in the column no one else uses, the crooked initial that belongs only to my stubbornness. We did not open. We were opened, only for a breath, only enough to count. As we parted elder to the scriptorium, where gauze teaches ink how to age with dignity, Father L. to his cell, where keys sleep like restless coins. I took the long way past the ostiolum imaginum. The water inside, having accepted that I am faithful, gifted me a childish picture, a pencil laid on a ledger, a hand hovering above it, uncertain whether to write truth or policy, a candle counting inches the way a patient child counts until a frightened friend emerges from a hiding place. The picture blurred, as if embarrassed by its own clarity. I whispered to it, "I know," and left it the courtesy of being a secret again. Sleep took me, like a clerk takes a folder, without romance, with competence, with a promise not to lose the paperclip. In my dream, a staircase counted me in the wrong order, and I forgave it the way we forgive a child who has learned 2 languages and mixes them deliberately to watch his parents smile. I woke with a minute missing and no injury to show for it. On the desk lay the keys I do own, ordinary and content, and a single crumb of bread from the eraser the elder had given me. I pressed the crumb into the margin where I had written, "We were opened," until it vanished, not erased, only softened, so that when a future hand found the sentence, it would be able to read it without waking the room. At Lauds, a novice asked the wall, not me, "What do we do with doors that want to be doors more than we want them to be?" The wall, steadfast, replied with the absence that is wiser than speech. I answered for myself, quietly enough that my breath stayed mine. We label them. We count candles. We keep house. I did not add the treason I now carry like a thin coin between tongue and teeth, and we prepare to say aloud, when asked by the right voice, that the most dangerous thing to the keepers of minutes is not outrage but memory returned. The city composed its mourning. The basilica's bones rehearsed their hymns. Below, the void doors did nothing at all, which is to say, they worked. The night after the gate exhaled, I expected thunder to come collect what calm had borrowed. None arrived. The sky practiced moderation. The stones rehearsed their indifference. The lamps learned to be content with halos that did not audition for sainthood. I took this as a permission to say the thing that tidy men avoid until the last page. I had stayed long enough to mistake accuracy for virtue. Accuracy is a candle trimmed well. Virtue is what you choose to write by its light. Father L. was waiting at the fresco of the seraph who measures shadow the wall that has become my confession. He had a look I preferred not to love on older faces. The smile of a man who suspects clarity will cost him a room he has learned to trust. Beside him, the elder folded a cloth, as if truth were made of warmed linen and ought to be carried clean. "You will leave soon," she said, not unkind. "The house prefers fresh hands to old certainties." "I have no certainties," I said, and heard the small lie ring the way a spoon rings when a cook taps it to pretend a stew is further along than it is. "Good," said Father L. "Then you may finally be useful. Ender, id no delm thus." We descended once more, not to tempt iron into memory, not to test candles against arithmetic, but to perform the smallest and most expensive rite the house permits. We audited our own obedience. In the ledger, obedience is listed as hours and inches and signatures. Tonight it would be listed as names. We began at the Index Sanctorum Delatorum. The book lay there like a priest at vespers, patient, practiced, unwilling to let the day go uncounted. I opened to St. Quietus and read aloud the reason, removed for encouraging scruples. The elder nodded and asked the only question worth a label. Did we remove a puzzle or a person? We listened. The page did not blush. We turned to St. Brigid-with-the-Other-Flames, harmonized into the larger saint to prevent a carnival of candles. Did we rescue attention or ration warmth? The page declined to argue. St. Cleophan, excised for being too useful to too many stories. Did we remove a face or a mirror? The room remembered the answer and permitted us not to say it. We crossed the aisle to the Thesaurus Miraculorum Redactorum, the reduced miracles. I lifted the box with the lens that wanted to be prophecy and is happiest now as glass. I turned its label over and wrote, in the margin meant for future kindness, "Return to light without apology." The compass that remembered north after a long season of being adored, forgiven its costume. The wood that had been bone by consent and need, shelved with gratitude for the heat it lent to winter prayers. Paper does not weep when you correct it. It accepts the amended tenderness, as if it had intended to be merciful all along. At Cartographia Tacita, the silent maps, a sheet that had once used planets to tether chapels, exhaled the dust of a lesson. We had tried to force the city to behave like a sky, when, in truth, it was the other way around. Heavens bent, slightly, to accommodate kitchens and deaths, and a bishop's need for a procession that wouldn't embarrass his shoes. I penciled a sentence I would have considered heresy the year before. We will allow the earth to breathe and ask calendars to pant politely. The map accepted its demotion from sermon to witness. In the Scriptorium Minor, the elder unwrapped the gospel from the memory of Mary with the reverence of a midwife who knows birth and death are neighbors and gossip too much. She let me read the second line. The bread he broke was warm in the middle, and the knife was not jealous. I hummed the closure tone without being told. The ink showed the dignity wounds learn when they have decided to be scars. Why this? I asked. Why keep this in linen when others sleep beneath iron? To one back. Because some memories refuse to serve arguments, she said. They are not useful. They are true. She showed me the column in our ledger I had invented for myself, and now could not deny. Things we return to themselves without shame. She added a line in her small linen voice. This sentence. I felt the house tilt toward us, curious, the way a cat pretends to yawn when it means to watch. We ended our audit at the ostium intercalare, the Intercalation Gate. We did not bring keys that glow without glowing. We brought only the measuring candle and the modest hope that we would leave the corridor less proud than we found it. I set the taper to its chalk-marked place. I counted absence. At 7, the air exhaled like a patient. At 11, the unlit lamp at position E tremored its apology. I did not circle the number this time. I wrote without ceremony. 11 again. We declined to be entertained. The gate behaved like an iron that had learned politeness in a school for aristocrats. It neither admitted nor denied, only allowed itself to be admired for not changing. Now, said Father L., and the tone cut me exactly where loyalty lives. He placed my palm on the iron as if conferring an order I had not the spine to refuse. Whistle. I did not. Not because I am brave, but because I had begun to weigh pleasures the way we weigh candles. The pleasure of proving would cost inches we did not own. Good, he said. You have learned to keep a minute you cannot afford to lose. He removed my hand, placed it over the ledger instead, and said the quiet thing that ruins a vocation while saving a man. Write for ears you will never meet. I wrote, if time can be edited, then kindness must be lengthened. I wrote, finishing the sentence I had hidden in a spine months ago. If calendars can pant, let mercy be the lung. If saints can be harmonized, let doubt be tuned, not silenced. If doors can breathe, teach novices to count absence without learning fear. Stop, said the elder gently, as one stays a child from putting his whole heart into a single line. Leave some truth for someone else to say. Do not hoard it all. That is a form of theft. We ascended. The stairs remembered me by smell and chose to be well-mannered. At the fresco, I laid my knuckles against the stone, expecting cool, receiving it like a signature. Mensura temporis. Mensura oblivionis. If forgetting has a measure, then so does the return of memory. I realized then what I had been hired to do under the name labeler, not to plead for permission, not to apologize in the eloquence of bureaucracy, not to burn inches of wick in the hope of a story we were hired to give back the handles that had been polished off things so they would be too slippery to lift. A name is a handle. A label is a handle. A small, accurate sentence is the hand that reaches. Upstairs they gave me an errand that behaved like a dismissal, dressed as trust. Carry a packet to a scholar who believed in donors more than in prophets. The packet smelled of rain and upholstery. It contained excerpts that would not terrify the public polite truths. Domesticated, I took the long way. On a bench in a courtyard, the kind where pigeons perform modest theater, I opened the outer envelope and added one line in a hand that would not shame the office. Kindly note, where the record is quietest, ask twice. I pressed the flap shut with the respect you give to seeds. That evening, the elder visited my cell with bread wrapped in an old letter. The letter had been written to a year. We borrow your Sunday, it began, and will return it when the children have learned a different song for rest. The bread carried an eraser's memory. We ate in silence. She refolded the letter and returned it to its pocket. Do you still hum at the door before sleep? She asked. I hum for the ledger, I said. It likes to be told the day is ending from a mouth. Good, then it will remember you as plural. She left me the old letter as if leaving a psalm. Before she closed the door, she said what no superior had said to me under that roof. If you must speak, speak softly and for a long time. I slept the way a choir sleeps, between verses, alert to the page turn. I dreamt a city where every erased saint had been shelved, not under absent, but waiting. A child looking for a patron of honest doubt found Quietus without the shame that makes knees sore. Bakers asked Brigid-with-the-Other-Flames to mind the oven and were not scolded for redundancy. Cleophan, ever adaptable, stood in a market crowd, face plain enough to be believed. The dream smelled of salt and cedar and bread that conceded its warmth. I woke before the closure tone could finish. The keys on my ring chimed once, modest as a cough in a library. Morning assembled itself, out of pigeons and pipes and ash, remembering rain. I packed what a man of my sort packs when he intends to become a rumor. A pencil, a knife dulled at the tip to prevent it from pretending to be courage, a tin of labels, a page torn from the ledger where my crooked initial owns a column, the elder's crumb of eraser wheat, Father L. 's sentence, like a splinter, I carry willingly, write for ears you will never meet. I left a note on my desk not addressed to anyone. The door remained closed. The house remained kind. We remained accountable. At the foot of the stairs, I turned once more to the fresco. Someone had added a new chalk mark barely visible unless you knew how to be impertinent with your eyes. 3 small bars like a breath measured in bread slices. It looked like nothing. It was everything. The ordinary sign that the next hand had arrived and intended to remember kindness as part of the arithmetic. I will not give you the names of streets. Streets do not matter to doors that refuse weather. Instead, I will give you what I promised the torch I was given under another name. You are listening because sleep likes stories that walk, not run. Let me hand you the pace and the pencil. If you wake tomorrow and the date feels too convenient, do not rage. Write it down. If a calendar trims a feast and calls the subtraction harmony, do not lecture. Ask whom the silence serves. If a story is labeled apocryphal and yet warms your hands in winter, read it aloud to someone who keeps a small kitchen holy. If a map shows the city breathing west in summer, let it breathe. Ask the council to schedule mercy around weather instead of the other way round. If a saint has been harmonized into a larger one, light 2 candles anyway and tell the smaller story without apologizing for its size. When you visit a museum built over a church, built over a house, built over a hearth, do not beg the walls for permission to remember. Put your knuckles to the fresco and learn the temperature of stone. Hum once quietly, so the room will remember you as plural. At a door that is not a door, do not imagine crossing. Count absence to 7. Pause at 11. That is where courtesy stands watch over curiosity. Do not whistle near iron that prefers silence. Do not stand between a flame and a hinge. Do not call fraud what you can call inserted, unless your purpose is humiliation rather than repair. Do not speak a number aloud when the room is embarrassed by its mathematics. Do not pray with your teeth. Pray with the way you return objects to what they were before rumor recruited them. Keep a column in your notebook that no one has asked for. Title it with a crooked initial only you can recognize. In it, list things you return to themselves without shame. a rumor given its true size, a child allowed to doubt without being shamed into bravery, a memory placed back into a mouth that knew its salt. When you die, and you will, and so will I, and so will every key that ever pretended to own iron, let someone find that column and decide to continue it. That is how clocks are outlived by candles. They do not fear outrage. Outrage burns fast and measures nothing but its own appetite. They fear memory returning, quietly, the way a corridor learns lungs. So, here is the call that does not raise its voice. Do not stop asking questions. Ask them with the softness that survives centuries. Ask them the way a careful man opens a drawer, palms flat, daring splinters to remain wood. Ask them in kitchens and in lines, and in the small pew at the back where children drop crayons beneath their father's shoes. Let the questions become labels, tin tongues on hair threads tied to shelves no decree can find quickly. Let them be modest and exact. Modesty goes where scandals cannot. Keep your torch low. High flames show off and die. A low flame, trimmed, becomes a measure of kindness. Pass it along like bread. Break it without ceremony. Share it without ledger. And if tonight you sleep, as I hope you will, sleep with a pencil nearby, a crumb of eraser under your pillow, and the knowledge that the house is counting breaths with you, not against you. Sleep now. The doors are labeled, the candles are counted, the ledger keeps its own prayers. When morning composes itself, take the pencil. Write what you saw. Write what you suspected. Write what you could not prove, but could not afford to forget. Write for ears you will never meet. And when the minute goes missing, as it will, as it did for me, do not accuse the clock. Thank the corridor for its honesty. Then, gently, lengthen your kindness to fill the space that minute would have been, and spend that mercy on someone who has been harmonized into silence. The labyrinth will meet you halfway. The memory will return, not as thunder, but as torchlight steady enough to read by and small enough not to frighten sleep.